students. My name is Devanti Bishamber.
And I am Akin Wilson, and we'll be presenting on the Human and Social Biology SBA.
Firstly, I am going to give you a brief overview of what your report should entail and how you should go about conducting your research, followed by the first 4 components that are expected for you to carry out in your report, along with examples. These components will be the background or overview of the issue, the problem statement, research objective, and methodology.
Then I will go on to look at the remaining components, which are the presentation of data, analysis and interpretation of data, the conclusion, your recommendations, along with your reflection. Our main reference is taken from the CSEC Human and Social Biology textbook by Annie Tyndale. Okay, students, now let's get into it.
Thank you, Akim. Now I'm going to present my aspect, like I first started off, an overview of what your report should entail. First of all, management of your project. It is important to start planning your project early. It should be completed during normal teaching time, and this will be guided by your teacher. Data collection, research work, writing of your report will need to be undertaken outside of the classroom, however. You should be allowed the opportunity to revise each stage of your work and resubmit for review and feedback. Choosing a health-related or environmental issue. This is a crucial part of the entire project. It is important that the issue is one that is relevant to your own experience and is meaningful to you or of interest to you. The issue you choose to study should follow these guidelines. It must be relevant to the CSEC Human and Social Biology syllabus. It must be possible and achievable. It must be able to provide data for analysis. To test your project ID, you can apply the following questions. Can I use my learning and studying of human and social biology to investigate the issue? Will it be possible for me to collect the data I need? Will I learn something that could have a meaningful impact on myself and my school or my community? Planning and executing your SBA. If your answer yes to all 3 questions, then your idea should meet all the requirements for your SBA. You should now be able to plan and discuss with your teacher to ensure that your topic or issue is suitable. You should also decide on the appropriate method to use. Okay, do you need to use a survey or a practical approach in carrying out your SBA? You should agree on a timeline for the completion of each step, and a suitable deadline must be agreed on by both yourself and teacher, which is workable for you in order for you to meet and complete tasks as you should. Writing your project report. Once you would have collected and processed your data, you can begin to plan and write your report, which is worth a total of 40 marks. The overall presentation of your report is important since it's worth 4 marks. In order for you to gain that 4 marks for the overall presentation, the following guidelines can be used. Ensure that your report layout follows the correct format. It must contain all the components as specified by the syllabus, and here is where you can refer to page 35 on the syllabus. That format is outlined there. Your report must contain a cover page, table of contents, bibliography, and appendices. You must at all times be consistent with the correct use of spelling and grammar throughout. You are advised to carry out spelling and grammar checks as you write. Number your pages and refer to these in your table of contents. Ensure that your report does not exceed 1,000 words. It must be noted here that your charts, graphs, tables, pictures, the bibliography, and appendices are not included in the 1,000 words. Make an electronic copy of your report and back it up with both hard and soft copies. Your cover page. Your cover page should include your name, your candidate number, the subject name, the year of your examination. The table of contents. Your table of contents must list the components of your report with their page numbers in the correct order. The integrity of your project. You need to be honest in your research and make sure that the project is your own work. Do not copy work done by anyone else or take off anyone else's work from the internet and use it, or even take credit for anyone else's work. This is known as plagiarism. Do not change data that you have collected or make up data or destroy the data if you find that your data does not support your original ideas. Now that I have finished talking about the overall project, allow me now to go into the components of the research as I would have suggested or named earlier, and the first one being the background or overview of the issue. Our first step, the background or overview of issue. Your introduction must begin with a description of the health-related or environmental issue to be investigated. This must be clearly written and must contain relevant details that explains the background behind the issue being investigated. It should also explain the reason for your choice. Good. So here is an example of how your background should be written. So I'm going to read it for you. According to a World Bank report published in 2018, the world generates 2.01 billion tons of municipal waste annually, and this is expected to grow to 3.40 billion tons by the year 2050. This waste poses a serious threat to human health and the environment. Therefore, it is up to everyone to reduce the volume of waste they produce, and that has to be disposed of daily. One way to achieve this and also conserve valuable natural resources is by practicing the 3 R's of waste management. That is, reduce, reuse, and recycle. With this in mind, I decided to investigate the waste management practices of households within my residential community of Kingsland to find out to what extent they separate recyclable items out of their reuse. So now let's look at this background here. Does it give description to a health-related or an environmental issue? Now here we can see it's an environmental issue being discussed. And what's the environmental issue? How they're practicing waste management. Waste management practices. And where are they going to do their investigation? Within their residential community. So with that in mind, that flow, brief, simple, concise, nothing too long or drawn out, you get to the point. And with that, you were able to get your full 2 marks. So I hope you understand how to write your background statement, and you're going to follow these simple instruction and guidance. Secondly, creating your problem statement. Write out your problem statement. This is a statement of the issue to be investigated. Now, what are the criteria that you need to bear in mind when you are writing your problem statement? It must be clearly and concisely stated. It must be written in the form of either an observation or a question. So these are the key points that you should note when you are writing your problem statement. So let me go it over back one more time for you. This is a statement of the issue to be investigated. What are the criteria, what you should apply when you are writing your problem statement? It should be a single sentence. It must be clearly and concisely stated. And it must be written in either the form of an observation or a question. So here is an example of how a problem statement can be written in the form of a question. So allow me to read it for you, and you can also go ahead, reading it. What are the waste management practices of households within the residential community of Kingsland Christchurch, Barbados? So you notice there it's very concise, it's written in the sentence form, it's clear, and so you stick with those steps. It must be clear, concise, written in either an observation or a question form, as we can see in this example given. So I hope you understand now how to do your problem statement. And also bear in mind, your problem statement stems from your background or overview, which you would have stated earlier. Okay, students, now that we would have finished and we have our background overview and we have our problem statement, the next component that we have to look at is writing our research objectives. Your research objective must clearly state the aim or purpose of the investigation. And it should not be more than one or exceeding two. So writing your research objective, it must be done in a single sentence. It must be clearly linked to the issue being investigated. It must be realistic or feasible. The best way to write your objective is with a verb, such as to investigate or to assess, or even to identify, to determine. This will enable you to now formulate your objectives. You know how to go about writing them, and remember it's very brief and concise. Okay, so let's now look at an example. So the example is to investigate the waste management practices within the Kingsland community with a view to reducing the volume of solid waste entering the landfill in Barbados. So you see how they started it? To investigate. And again, the waste management practices, that is what they're investigating. So you see the issue again there. Where are they going to investigate this? In Barbados. In the Kingsland community in Barbados. So those areas are specified here. So once you have these here again, you can clearly get your 2 marks for this section. Point to note, it is important to write your problem statement and research objective before you start, because they will give you your project direction and purpose. They will also help to keep you on track and to know where you're going. Step 4 component is identifying your methodology. Now for your methodology, there are various sections that you have to cover. For example, the first part that you need to have is your research instrument. When you're carrying out your investigation, it can be done in the form of a survey or practical activity or laboratory work, which can be in the form of an experiment to gather your data. Your research instrument could be a questionnaire, interview, an observation checklist, an experiment, or an investigation. Ensure that you have sufficient time available to carry out your research. Continuation on the research instrument. Now for the survey, a questionnaire or interview can be used. You must write out the exact questions that you will use to draw up your questionnaire or ask in your interview. The questions must reflect your objective. For the observation checklist, you can prepare this in the form of a table with your list of observations to be made in the left column an appropriate headed column to the right for check-in. If you're going to carry out an experiment, you must plan the method very carefully and ensure that any measuring devices or instrument you may need are available to you. So now that we have identified our instrument, it's very important for us to have a sample. You must decide on the sample you're going to use. Who are you going to ask to participate in your project? This will depend on whether the research is to be carried out at your school or in your community. You must also decide on how many participants you are going to ask to take part in your research. The larger your sample, the more accurate your results will be. But the more time it will take to collect and analyze them. So you must not make your sample size too big. You must ensure that all participants understand the objective of your research and are willing to give their consent to take part. You can seek consent from guardians or parents of participants. The form should state your research objectives and make it known that all information will be anonymous and confidential. You can also ask your participants to respond honestly. Going back to our research on the waste management, the methodology, here is an example of how it can be done. So allow me to read it through to you. You can also go through it to see if you have. In essence, we are looking for the sample must be stated and a description of the sample must be stated. So those are the two things we have to identify here. So let's get started. To collect data, a printed questionnaire was handed out to 30 households in the Kingsland community. These households were randomly selected, and one person in each household was asked to consent to take part in the research, and then asked to complete the questionnaire for the entire household over a period of 7 days. So let's look here. So the sample that they're using here is 30 household, where in the Kingsland community. So they would have printed their questionnaire and they're handing it out to 30 households. And from the household, one person was allowed to answer for a 7-day period. So the sample stated and described. So now that we would have established our sample, the next thing that we have to look at and take into consideration here is the instrument. And the instrument used here is a questionnaire. So let's see how it was written or done. The questionnaire, which is included as Appendix A, consisted of 10 questions, which provided answer boxes for the responses, with a few having the option of providing a short answer. 2 tables, included as Appendix B, were also provided to help householders tally the number of each type of recyclable item and bags of waste disposed of for over the 7 days period. So let's identify what is on this questionnaire here. So first of all, the instrument used is the questionnaire. Now, what is the description given here? How are the questions structured? So the questionnaire consists of 10 questions, and then they go on to say they have answer boxes for them to put their responses in. They also have a few questions where they have to give short answer. They had tables where they had to do tallies to show the type of recyclable item. So you see the description consists of what is in the questionnaire, what the questionnaire looks like. Not what is a questionnaire, and they didn't give things like advantages of using the questionnaire, disadvantages. They're simply giving a description of what the questionnaire is like, what is in it, what it contains. So I hope you have an understanding here when you're doing this part under your methodology, how you should go about doing so. Now, if that's so, allow me to continue. The method of data collection. So we would have already established it's a survey method that is used. So here they are justifying why they use this method. This method of data collection was chosen because it was a relatively quick and easy way to collect information from a fairly large number of households. And it allowed the respondents to remain anonymous. So you see, they are justifying, they're showing us and giving us reason why they choose this method to investigate or to use in their research. Lastly, under the methodology part, there is a section or a component where you have to state a limitation. Now, what is a limitation? A limitation is any source that can affect your result. Now, in this particular example, the limitation was, however, was that some households found it difficult to decide on the size of refuse bags they used, since these were given as small, medium, and large in the questionnaire, and more specific dimensions were not given. So the limitation here was that they did not have the correct option to choose from. They were limited to those 3 sizes, so that could have proven some inaccuracy in the result part. So that was a limitation that could have affected their result. So students, I would have dealt with the first 4 components of the SBA, and I will now hand you over to my colleague, Mr. Akeem Wilson, who is going to deal with the remaining 6 components of the SBA.
Thank you very much, Ms. Devanti. Now, students, that you would have went through the methodology and you would have collected your information, it is now time to present your data. Now, for the presentation of data, we must and we have to present our data in at least 2 forms. Now, what do we mean when we speak about forms? Forms refers to things such as line graphs, bar graphs, histogram, tables, pie charts, etc. Now, the data that we are presenting must be accurate and related to our research question. Now, all the charts, graphs, and tables that we are presenting our data on must be labeled accurately. Let us now look at 2 examples. Turning our attention to the screen, we can see that we have a table being presented there for us. Now, how do we use this table? First of all, the table must bear a title. So, for example, the table below shows the number of graphs and average number of bags of refuse of different sizes disposed of in the week by the households that separate their waste and those who do not separate their waste. Now, looking at this table, we can see that the title is clear. That is, the title is telling us what our table is representing. In addition to that, the table must bear headings. So, for example, the first column is headed the size of the bag, followed by the total number of bags disposed of in 1 week. So, in other words, students, our table should have headings so that we will know what is being represented in the respective cells of the table. Now, in some cases, you might find yourselves doing calculations and have to record your data in that table. In such a case, we must ensure that we have the units being stated in the table. Sometimes you might feel the need to use graphs. However, our graphs must bear certain pertinent information. For example, turning our attention again to the screen, we can see here in the diagram that the graph must bear a title. So, like your table, the graph should have a title. A graph must also have a scale, The axes must be labeled correctly and accurately, as well as the graph must say what each component is representing. For example, the first bar in this bar graph that we have here can represent number of days in a week. The second bar can represent number of days in a month. So in other words, students, when we are presenting our data in two forms, and remember, it must be related to our research question. This data must be in two forms, and these forms that you are going to choose that is most suitable to present your data must be labeled correctly. Now that we would have presented our data, it is now time to analyze and interpret our data. So students, let us look at what it is that we have to do in our analysis and interpretation. Now, in your analysis, we must analyze the data that we would have gathered using appropriate calculations, statistics, or themes. You must also write a summary of the data that you are presenting. Now, after doing this, you must make at least two statements about what you have found or discovered from the data you presented. Note well that your findings must be consistent with your analysis. What do we mean by that? So, for example, we are talking about waste management. It therefore means that we would have presented information on waste management. But in our analysis, we have to also talk about the data that is on waste management. We cannot go ahead and talk about obesity because our project, our research question is not based on obesity. Now, here are some tips for you when you're writing your analysis. So on the screen, I have some questions there that you can ask yourselves before or during the process of doing the analysis of your data. So the first question reads, what exactly is the data and its analysis telling me? So you ask yourself this question. So when looking at the analysis, looking at your data, you can ask yourself, what is the data actually telling you? And from that, it's going to help you to say exactly or to analyze exactly what we are looking for based on that research question that you would have done earlier. The next question you can ask yourself is, what are some of the patterns and trends that are seen in the data? So after analyzing the data using whether calculations or your statistics or themes, you must look at the data now and see what trends or patterns we can draw from that data. After which, we can ask ourselves, what are some of the unexpected results or anomalies, some things that we didn't expect to get when conducting this research? And finally, students, we can ask ourselves, are there any links or associations between sets of data? Now let us turn our attention to have a more hands-on experience using an example of the analysis of our data. So looking on the screen, we have projected here a suitable example. It says that the data shows that of the 3 types of recyclable items disposed of by the 30 households surveyed, plastics make up 56.1%, metal cans made up 27.2%, and glass made up 16.7% only. Out of this, 12 out of the 30 households, or 40%, separated any of these items out of their refuse. However, of the households separating their waste, nearly all of them separated plastics, glass, and metal cans from each other, while only 41.7% separated paper and cardboard, and 25% separated the biodegradable food and garden waste. All households separating food and garden waste indicated that they composed it. Now, students, looking at this, we can see that in this example, calculations were used as well as statistics was given. Now, where are the calculations? Note well, students, that we're not putting the breakdown of the calculation in the analysis of data, but rather we are going to include it in our appendices. And a little later on, we're going to look at that. Now, continuing with the example, as we look at the screen here, you can see the example and you can read it along with me, students. It says there that out of the 18 households not separating any items out of their refuse, 44.4% indicated that it was too time consuming to do so. 27.8% said they lacked storage space for separating items, and 22% said they did not know what to do with separated items. Now, these analyses are given in Appendix C. Note, students, we can also indicate in our analysis where the breakdown of the information can be found. And as indicated to you, we put them into the analysis. Further, one noticeable trend was that the average number of bags of refuse of all three sizes put out for collection by households that separated the refuse was less than half the number put out by households not separating any items. Again, students, we can see that in this example, we are continuing to analyze our data, identifying any trends or patterns and being specific. Because remember, when you submit these projects, it must be easy for your teacher to read, understand, and mark. Now, to end off our analysis, looking at the screen here, we have an example of how to end the analysis. So it reads, and you can read with me, 2 important findings from the data presented are given below. So here it is that we now would have listed our findings, and remember that these findings must be based on the data that we would have collected. For example, more than 50% of households in the Kingland community do not separate any item out of their refuse. The other finding is households in the Kingland community that do separate their refuse reduce the quantity of refuse that have to be collected by over 50%. Students, again, remember that the analysis and interpretation of your data is a critical part of your report, and therefore we need to ensure that the components are included. Now, students, that you would have analyzed your data, it is now time for you to make conclusions. Now, your conclusions that are going to be drawn must concisely summarize the information in your project. Also, the conclusion drawn must be logical and based on your findings. It should also be related to your research objective. Let us look at an example. Turning our attention to the screen, we provided you with an example, and you can go right ahead and read with me. It says here that separating food and garden waste, paper and cardboard, plastics, glass, and metals from household refuse reduces the quantity of their refuse that has to be disposed of by more than half. However, over half the households in the Kingland community do not separate any of these materials out of the refuse. So you see, students, the conclusion is very much concise. It is related to the objective that we would have stated earlier. So remember that at all times, the conclusion must be concise and related to your research objective. When we finish doing our conclusion, it is now time to make recommendations. Now, what are recommendations? Recommendations are suggestions of measures that could be taken to address any issues identified in your research, including suggestions for future research that could be undertaken. One of the things I want to bring to your attention about the recommendations that you are going to be putting forward are that they must be realistic and based on your findings. Now, you might ask yourselves, how many recommendations do you have to put forward? Now, you must put forward at least 2 recommendations. And to be on the safe side, students, you can put forward 3 recommendations. Now, how do we write the recommendation? So let us now turn our attention to the screen. Here we have an example of how to write the recommendation. So we can start off by saying, based on the findings, the following recommendations are proposed. In this example provided to you, we have 2 recommendations being put forward. So you can read them with me. An education campaign should be launched to educate those in the Kingsland community about the importance of practicing the 3 R's of waste management and the ways in which they can do this, including how to compost biodegradable waste. So you see, students, that this recommendation being put forward is based on the findings that we would have found when conducting the project or research. It is also realistic, meaning that it is something that can be done. The other recommendation reads that color-coded bins should be placed within the Kingsland community to make it easier for households to dispose of their recyclable waste. This recommendation can also be done and is also based on the findings after conducting this research. Now that we would have made our recommendations, we are coming down to the ending part of the project. Now, this part of the project is where you are going to talk about how this project would have impacted you. Guess what? This is the reflection. Now, you now need to write a reflection which will aim to help you, yes, you, the student, to find relevance and meaning in your project. Now, the reflection should include the following information. We must state at least 2 lessons that we would have learned after undertaking the project. So after you would have spent all of this time doing this project, you now have to tell your teachers in the project what you would have learned by conducting this project. Mind you, we must state 2 lessons that we would have learned. In addition to that, we must state how any of those lessons that we would have learned can be applied to our personal or everyday life. Moving on, the reflection should also include one way in which you believe the project can be improved. That is, in your methodology, you would have stated, for example, limitations. Now in your reflection, you can say how this limitation can be eradicated. Or we can also say how the methodology can be improved. That is the collection of data system that we would have used, what other systems could be used in the near future. And to wrap up our reflection, we must state 1 social impact and 1 economic impact the issue could have on your school or community if it is not rectified. Remember, students, that this reflection must also be related to our research question or objective. Now that we would have highlighted the components of the reflection, let us turn our attention to the screen to read and analyze an example of a reflection. So students, take time out and read with me. One lesson learned after undertaking this project is that many households in the Kingsland community appear to be unaware of the importance of disposing of their waste in environmentally safe and friendly ways. And this issue should be addressed. Now, note well that here we are giving one way in which, or one lesson that we would have learned after conducting this research. And by reading that statement, it is made clear so that when we submit our reports or we submit our final project to be marked by our teachers, they will understand clearly what we are trying to see. Moving on, another lesson is that it is up to each individual to play his or her part to practice the 3 R's of waste management in order to reduce the environmental damage caused by refuse disposal and conserve valuable natural resources. Now, students, there we can see clearly in the example that there are 2 lessons being highlighted which would have been learned by the researcher that would have undertaken this project. Continuing the reflection, as you can see on the screen, and can continue to read with me. Let us read together. By doing this project, I will now ensure that I reuse any reusable items and do not throw any recyclable items into the general refuse, and that I educate those around me to do the same. Now, here in this paragraph, students, we can see that the researcher is talking, or clearly talking, about one lesson that he or she would have learned by undertaking this project, and also how it can be applied to their personal life. To wrap up the conclusion now, we must indicate one way in which the project can be improved. Mind you, the reflection is not yet finished, but read with me, students. My project could be improved by including questions that target the respondents' knowledge about the 3 R's of waste management and how to go about practicing them to help guide educational campaigns in the Kingsland community. Here again, we can see that the researcher is being specific in relation to a method that can be used to improve the project. It is now time to wrap up our reflection. And remember the latter part of the reflection, we must state one social and one economic impact of this project if not implemented or rectified. So turn your attention again to your television screen and read ahead with me. If not rectified, the waste disposal practices of the Kingsland community will continue to contribute to the increasing demands for valuable land that should be given over for disposable refuge and increase the change of environmental destruction that accompany its disposal. Also, the cost of refuse disposable will continue to be high, reducing the amount of money available for economic development within Barbados, including within the Kingsland community. Here again, students, let us pause for a moment and digest what this paragraph is telling us. Now, in the first part of the paragraph, it indicates to us a social issue that if this project is not, or the findings from this project is not rectified, that it can have a social impact not only on the Kingsland community, but also in the entire country of Barbados. Following that, the researcher then went on to talk about an economic impact. And when we speak about economics, we speak about money. So students, remember that in your reflection, we should ensure that we include 2 lessons learned, one way in which your lessons learned can be applied to your personal life, one way in which the project can be improved if not rectified, and finally, we must include 1 social and 1 economic implication of the project. Now that you've finished writing your reflection, guess what? You are almost to the completion of your Human and Social Biology SBA. Now, one of the tips I want to give to you guys is that as you conduct your project, it is important to take note of all of the sources you used, whether it's a textbook, a newspaper article, or even the internet, because this is the point in time that you need it. Yes, you are going to need those references to be included in your bibliography. Now, what is a bibliography? Now, the bibliography is a list of sources of information that you use to help you prepare and carry out your research project and to interpret your findings. Now, note that as you list your sources in the bibliography, they should be listed in alphabetical order. In addition to that, we should follow the APA referencing style. Now, what do we mean by all of this? Let us turn our attention again to the screen. Now, here we have an example of how we can cite those textbooks that we would have used. Now, for textbooks, we must first start off by stating the last name of the author, followed by the initial for his or her first name. We must then include the publication date, followed by the title of the source, followed by the location of the publisher of the book, followed by the name of the publisher of the book. Below that, I have there for you an example. So the name of this author is Tyndale. That is the surname of the author. Now, in this case, we don't only have 1 author, we have 2. So in both cases, we would have given the surname followed by the initials for the first name of the author. So let us read together. We have there Tyndale A and D'Souza S. In bracket, we have the year of publication, which is 2022. Followed by that, we have the title of the book. The name of the book is Concise Revision Course for CSEC Human and Social Biology. Then we have the name of the publisher of the book. So there we have, it was published in London by HarperCollins Publishers. So remember, students, that in order to gain the marks in our bibliography, we must ensure that we reference using the APA referencing style. And this is a suitable example on the screen for you. Now, you might ask yourselves as you sit comfortably looking at this television broadcast, how do I go about referencing a website? Let us once more look at the screen and let us go through the main points for citing online sources. So here again, we must have the author's last name followed by his or her first name initials, followed by the publication date, followed by the title of the source, after which we are going to copy the URL and paste it there, and then we put the date retrieved. The date retrieved basically is the date that you would have accessed the article. Students, one of the things I want you to be mindful and careful of is plagiarism. Do not just copy and paste information or data because your teachers will be checking back these websites. In addition to that, Please, when you're using these websites or sources, ensure that we can gather the information such as the author's name, the date of publication, and so on from the article. And remember, do not use sources that can be edited by anybody, for example, Wikipedia. So here's an example again for you on how to cite online sources. So this article that was used, we have here the author's surname, which is LaCruz, followed by his or her initials for the first name, which is NM, followed by the date, the article, and in this case, the researcher was lucky because sometimes you might find yourselves that they only produce or present to you the year the article was published. Sometimes you may not get the entire or the exact day that it was published on, but that is fine once we have at least the month in which it was published along with the year. After which, we have the title of the article. So the title of this article is Reduce, Reuse, Recycle, Alternatives for Waste Management, followed by the site that we will have retrieved it from. So you simply put retrieve from, copy the URL for the article, and paste the URL there in the bibliography. And then you put the date you would have retrieved the information. And that is basically how we will compile that bibliography. Students, remember that your bibliography is an important component of your SBAs. And once not done correctly, can warrant your teacher taking away some marks from you. Now we are at the final part of the project, and I can see you getting excited after all of this information. And guess what? I know that you now are confident that you will have an excellent SBA. Now we're going to move our attention to the appendix of the research project. This is the last component of your SBA. Yes, I would say that too. I know you're excited that this is the final aspect of the SBA. So now, what is the appendix? So let us go through what this appendix is all about. Now, an appendix contains supplementary materials that is not an essential part of the text itself, but which may be helpful in providing a more comprehensive understanding of the research problem. Or it is information that is too cumbersome to be included in the body of the paper. A separate appendix should be used for each distinct topic or set of data and always have a title descriptive of its contents. Let us talk a little bit about what we mean. What we're saying earlier in our project, for example, in our analysis and in our methodology. So in our methodology, we had a questionnaire. So the first thing you'll do, Appendix A, under that you give it a title, questionnaire, and then you put a copy of your questionnaire in Appendix A. Now, when it came to us doing our presentation of data, we had, for example, tally tables. So tally tables cannot go under Appendix A because it is a separate entity. Therefore, we simply caption it Appendix B. Underneath it, we put tally tables and we include all of our tally tables there. Also, in our analysis of data, we had calculations. So now we will have a separate appendix titled Appendix C. Under that, we name it Analysis of Data. And all of the calculations that you would have done to get those respective percentages and so on, you can now include in appendix. So students, remember that all of the information that is too cumbersome to be included in your report, write-up, or the actual research of itself, we put them into the appendix. Take an important note that each entity being placed into the appendix must be separate. And there you have it, students, the end of your SBA. I hope that this information that you would have gathered from this presentation today will help you to perfect and complete an SBA where you'll gain 40 out of 40 marks. So students, now that you would have sat there and you would have listened to us, I hope that you would have taken a lot of notes and you would have gathered all of the necessary information that you need to complete your Human and Social Biology SBA so that you can get the full 40 marks. Don't you think so, Ms. Devanti?
Yes, very well, Akeem. So students, it is our hope that you're going to take all the guidance that you receive and you're going to put them in practice, and you are going to get that full 40 marks and get that grade one. Thank you.
Awesome.